Good afternoon, a warm welcome to Business Daily. I'm Ji Myung-gil in Seoul. Let's get started with today's highlights. The Korean government outlines a new set of measures to stabilize the country's overheating property market and tighten lending rules to curb speculation. Korea and the U.S. plan to meet for talks on possible revisions to the 5-year-old Korea-U.S. free trade agreement. But it is unclear when and even where the negotiations will take place. These stories and more coming right up. The Korean government has proposed major changes to the national tax code, shifting gears from policies that support corporate growth to those aimed at boosting welfare of the average household. But will they be enough tax collected to support government expenditures? Our Oh Seong starts us off.
Job creation, fair income distribution and bankrolling government expenditures. These are the three pillars of the Korean government's tax revision plan, supporting its 5-year policy map of income-driven growth.
To achieve an economic paradigm shift away from low growth and polarization, we must adjust and expand tax revenue to support income-driven growth and welfare services.
This means new tax breaks worth nearly $1.2 billion in housing, childcare and other living expenses for low and middle-income households, as well as small and medium businesses that employ more permanent workers, improve labour conditions and boost wages. Meanwhile, the government's wealthiest firms and individuals will have to reach deeper into their pockets. The corporate tax rate will be raised from the current 22% to 25% for companies with annual revenues exceeding $178 million. The income tax rate for Korea's wealthiest individuals will also be hiked to 40% and 42% respectively. The revision also proposes cuts in various deduction schemes, including those on capital gains for major shareholders, transfer of assets, as well as R&D investment. These adjustments are expected to boost tax revenue by nearly $5 billion a year. But the big question is whether these measures will be enough to finance the government's 5-year policy initiatives, which come with a price tag of $159 billion US. The government expects to generate $54 billion from natural tax gains over the next 5 years, with the economy currently growing at a better than expected pace.
An extra $9.9 billion in taxes were collected by May this year, but whether extra revenue will continue to increase depends on the health of the economy, rather than simple government promises.
Experts say another tax hike seems inevitable, as the burden of tax is directly linked to the scale of welfare services.
Reducing tax benefits for large companies would raise the actual corporate tax collection rate, which is estimated to be lower than the nominal tax rate. Also, a hike in value-added tax, which is relatively low in Korea, could substantially boost revenue to support welfare. This would generate a redistribution effect in line with the government's agenda.
Lawmakers are set to deliberate over the tax revision plan in September, during the National Assembly's next plenary session. Oh Seong, Business Daily.
The South Korean government has rolled out measures aimed at curbing the continuing trend of soaring real estate prices, the second set of regulations since the Moon administration took power. These measures are aimed at reining in speculative property investments. Let's connect to our Kim Mo-gyun, who's been following the story for us. Mo-gyun, fill us in on these new guidelines.
Sure, Myung-gil. During a briefing with reporters this afternoon, the Minister of Land, Infrastructure and Transport, Kim Hyun-mi, listed new measures aimed at reining in speculative investments in the housing market. Before she began, the minister strongly stated that the government will allow real estate prices to be distorted by speculation, will not allow. With this firm stance, she said the government's new measures can be classified into 3 groups. The first is to respond with different customized measures for overheated regions. And under this policy, the government designated all 25 districts in Seoul, as well as the southern city of Sejong and Gwacheon, as excessive speculation zones, and classified a dozen of them as speculative districts, which will be subject to far tougher tax and financial regulations and state scrutiny. Second, the government will work to prevent owners of multiple homes from buying more residential properties for investment purposes, and at the same time, support real estate transactions for those who actually need a home to live in. It adopted stricter rules which require multiple homeowners to pay higher capital gains tax when they sell their houses. The government also lowered the loan-to-value or debt-to-income ratio to 40% in some overheated regions in order to make it harder for people to take out loans and help contain real estate speculation. And finally, the government is seeking to increase its supply of housing to ordinary citizens by expanding its public housing provisions consistently.
Now, Mo-kyun, these types of measures aren't the first we've seen from this administration. It's last coming in June. Why are the follow-up measures being introduced now?
Yes, you're right. As you mentioned earlier, it's the second set of measures by the Moon Jae-in administration, and today's announcement is largely because the government felt the need to tighten the leash even further as it was unable to see the desired effects from the previous property market guidelines unveiled in June. But with the rising prices continuing to rise, there were calls for additional, more comprehensive measures this time. Earlier in the day, Finance Minister Kim Dong-yeon said, however, that if price instability continues even after these new guidelines, the government could deliver further measures down the line that better suit the market conditions. This has been Kim Mo-kyun for Business Daily.
Samsung Electronics has defended its crown as the world's top smartphone maker by market share, despite ticking slightly lower. According to market research firm Strategy Analytics, Samsung Electronics shipped out 79.5 million smartphones worldwide in the second quarter, seizing 22% of the global market share. Runner-up Apple took a market share of 11.4%, shipping out 41 million iPhones in the April to June period. Apple narrowly beat out China's Huawei, which sat in third place with a 10.7% market share, gaining ground in Asian and European markets with its P10 and Mate 9 handsets. Oppo and Xiaomi rounded out the top 5. Korea's big two chip makers are set to make record investments this year amid a boom in global demand and soaring profits. Industry sources say Samsung Electronics and SK hynix are preparing to invest roughly $26.7 billion combined to upgrade and expand their production lines. Samsung is already close to topping last year's total facility investment. Just in the first half of 2017 alone, it is expected to focus on VNAND flash and image sensor products together with its foundry business. SK hynix meanwhile says it will expand production capacities for DRAM and NAND flash chips to keep up with demand, with an eye on long-term growth. Korea's automobile industry is sputtering, with lackluster exports and sluggish domestic demand taking their toll, with earnings of Korea's top two automakers having plummeted. The country's status as the world's sixth largest automobile powerhouse is also staggering. Our Lee Ju-young has more.
1.3 million vehicles. That's the number of vehicles Korea's automobile manufacturers shipped out in the first half of this year. With no significant factors in view that could spark a turnaround in the industry, car exports this year is estimated to reach a total of 2.6 million. Ever since hitting a high of 3.1 million car exports in 2012, figures have been dropping ever since. The biggest reason behind the decline is attributed to lackluster sales in China. In fact, Hyundai and Kia Motors sales in the world's second-largest consumer market nearly halved to roughly 430,000 in the first half of this year compared to last year, before China's THAAD retaliation started gaining full traction. This caused a sharp drop on both the operating profit and sales of the two companies. On top of that, with domestic sales also having plummeted for the first time in 3 years, local car production this year is projected to hit its lowest level since 2010.
Demand for cars fell due to the sluggish global economy, the trade barrier between the U.S. and Latin America, and the THAAD retaliation from China.
As both internal and external risk factors cast a shadow over the country's automobile industry, Korea's status as an industry powerhouse is also on shaky ground. After being overtaken by India, it has moved down one notch to become the world's sixth largest car manufacturer. Even this lower standing is now being threatened by Mexico this year.
While Korea's automobile industry focused on quantitative growth, other countries did not hesitate to invest in innovation since the financial crisis.
Market watchers add that with massive labor union strikes to enter full swing starting this month, Korea's auto industry is facing a bumpy road ahead. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
Tensions are simmering as Korea and the U.S. prepare for joint committee talks on revising their bilateral free trade agreement. Upon request from Washington, Seoul plans to objectively examine, analyze, and assess the effects of the Korea-U.S. FTA since it came into force 5 years ago. Let's take a look.
Back in July, the U.S. formally notified Korea that it wanted to start the process of revising the free trade agreement between the two countries. The Office of the U.S. Trade Representative called for the convening of a special joint committee in order to discuss the removal of barriers to U.S. trade and consider needed amendments to the trade pact. The Korea-U.S. FTA has widely been considered a symbol of the two countries' economic cooperation. But U.S. President Donald Trump pointed to his country's trade deficit with Korea and called the agreement a job-killing deal and a disaster. Korea says even though the U.S. has a deficit in goods trade, it has enjoyed surpluses in the services trade under the FTA deal. Seoul added the deal helped improve bilateral merchandise trade balances, meaning that if it had not been for the trade deal, U.S. trade deficits would have been even larger.
For more insights on the Korea-U.S. FTA trade deal, we have Professor Shin Sang-yup from Kyung University joining us in the studio. Welcome, Professor.
Happy to be here.
Now let's get straight to the question. Now it seems that the two countries can't even agree upon a date or a place to hold a joint committee meeting. Now, do you see this as a sign that maybe the negotiations might have a rocky process?
I think so. The negotiation could be quite difficult for both sides because, as you know very well, both sides have shown very different stance, even on the places for the special sessions of the Joint Committee on the Korea-U.S. FTA, and even the date. So, I mean, when we look at those kind of different stance between two governments, we can understand how they want to take the initiatives at the joint committee special session between two countries, because the South Korean government thinks that if we have the special session in Seoul, it could be more beneficial for Korea. But the USA want to have the special session of the joint committee in Washington because they have a plan to have the renegotiation talk for NAFTA on the August 16th. So when we consider the resources and the energies, the available energies to USA government, actually to carry on the negotiation, two negotiations for two different FTAs in different places, it seems to be very burdened and very difficult for the USA government. So strategically, they want to have the special session of joint committee for Korea-U.S. FTA and the NAFTA renegotiation at the same place and during the same period.
So there's two negotiations indeed on the table.
So from the, well, as you mentioned before, to decide the places for the special committee, special session of the joint committee and the date, it seems to be very difficult, so we can guess how the negotiations will be rocky.
Right, so President Moon Jae-in appointed the head of the Trade Ministry's newly created Trade Negotiation Bureau. So do you think this is an indication that talks might be imminent?
I don't think so, because, you know, as I already explained very briefly, USA has a plan to have the renegotiation for NAFTA on 16th August. So definitely, in some sense, they don't have any reason to hurry up the negotiation with Korea for Korea-U.S. FTA. As we discussed before, there are many difficulties, many differences between two governments about the Korea-U.S. FTA. So USA, maybe they want to even think about the later time, for the special joint committee special session meeting. And Korea as well, we don't have any enough reason, the reason to hurry up the meeting with the United States for the Korea-U.S. FTA, because, you know, the Korean government has very clearly insisted we don't want to have a renegotiation, actually, through the special sessions of the joint committee between two governments. Definitely, Korean government just tried to explain or persuade the USA government, Korea-U.S. FTA is one of the win-win trade deal for both governments.
Right, Professor. And what's interesting about it is that the new trade, the head of the Trade Negotiation Bureau, he actually led the Korea-U.S. FTA under the former Nomu현 administration.
Right.
So do you think this was taken into account during his
appointment?
appointment?
I think it's quite easy for us to understand why Moon Jae-in government appointed him on this post, because about 10 years ago, he was the head of Korean trade negotiation team for the Korea-U.S. FTA. And actually, right now, the Korea-U.S. FTA issue is certainly one of the most important things for Korean economy and for Korean trade. So by appointing him on this post, definitely the Korean government shows how what kind of thought they have about Korea-U.S. FTA. That much, we can say the Korean government seems to be committed fully to have a solution for the imbalanced trade between two countries. Between USA and USA and Korea.
Right, Professor. And both countries seem to have different calculations and data regarding the trade imbalance between the U.S. and Korea. And President Trump even said, we have, U.S. has some $40 million in trade deficits with Korea on trade. So do you think it's true? And does the Korean government have any measures towards this claim?
We have, there must be some big differences in the figures, suggested by USA government and by Korean government. As you just briefly mentioned, the USA government led by the President Trump, they had about $40 billion trade deficit in trade with South Korea. But when you look at more details, trade in goods, actually, according to the USA, they had $27.7 billion trade deficit, while Koreans said, no, it's not true. According to the Koreans' calculation, the trade deficit in in goods with the USA had in the trade with Korea was only $23.3 billion. So there must be $4.4 billion differences. And if I give you some more data, when we calculate the trade deficit which USA had, including the service sector, total trade deficit with the USA had in the trade with Korea was only $17.6 billion. So we cannot understand from where USA government has used $40 billion trade deficit in Korea. So at the special session of the joint committee between two governments, under the Korea-U.S. FTA, we should explain the reasons. And as I said before, so because of these reasons, the Korean government has insisted that we are going to, Korean government proposed to USA government to analyze and review together the effects of the Korea-U.S. FTA, firstly, based on the very fair and very accurate calculation about the effects of the Korea-U.S. FTA. Maybe, according to the Korean government, we will be able to discuss about the causes for the imbalanced trade between USA and Korea.
Okay, and going on to the last question, so Professor, so what types of amendments or modifications do you think will be on the table if talks do take place?
Yes, USA government has our targets, the auto industry and the steel industry, because they said that even the Secretary of Commerce, Ross, he emphasized that the main the causes for imbalanced trade between two countries is trade of the auto, the cars, and then they insisted there are so many the non-tariff barriers for the USA cars to be exported to Korea. So there must be some discussion about the trade deal, the terms and conditions, such as the non-tariff barriers for the USA autos. They want to increase their exports to Korea. And how about the steel products? Also, they emphasize that Korea has exported the various types of the steel products to USA at dumped price. And even they insist that the Chinese steel products have been exported via Korea at a dumped price. So there must be some request from the USA government to discuss about the relative the terms and conditions for the exports and imports of the steel products. And how about Korea? How about Korean government? Maybe we have to discuss about the loss in the trade of the intellectual property right related products. We have, USA has gained many things in the trade of the service sector, in the trade between two governments. So we have to also discuss about the how we're gonna reduce the trade, volume gap between two governments in the trade of the service products.
Well, many businesses certainly will be looking out for how things play out in the near future. Thank you for your insights, Professor.
My pleasure.
And moving on to our coverage of the markets, to give us a picture of today's stock market action, we have our markets contributor, Jamie Kim, joining us on the phone today. Hello, Jamie.
Hello.
So how did Korean equities perform today?
Well, the benchmark Kospi rose 0.19% to close at 2427.63 points, ending higher for the third straight day. And the tech-heavy Kosdaq ended in a positive territory on a second straight day, rising 0.67% to finish at 657.52 points. Foreigners turned into net buyers, helping to push up the main index. And also, of course, good news from Wall Street was another factor that lifted investor sentiment. Overnight, the Dow Jones hit another record high on anticipation of positive quarterly corporate earnings. And the S&P was also up by 0.24%, while the Nasdaq closed 0.23% higher.
So what's leading the market cheers? Could you give us a more detailed breakdown of the stock action today?
Sure. Well, tech stocks, which had been trending downward on profit-taking, told the main voice into positive territory after Apple announced better than expected earnings. And number one market cap Samsung Electronics added 0.82%, while SK Hynix jumped 3.82%. Medicine, manufacturing, and communication sectors were also up. Specifically, among Kosdaq Pharmaceuticals, anti-wrinkle drug makers Meditox and Hugel were some of the top performers. Meditox closed 1.67% higher, while Hugel was up 1.32%. Now, on the other hand, steel, finance, and construction sectors were among the underperformers. Stocks in these industries have seen sizable gains in the previous week, so investors appear to be cashing in. POSCO ended 1.2% lower.
There are a number of market events to look forward to this week that could have an impact on local equities. Can you guide us through them?
Certainly. The government has announced a new set of measures to curb real estate prices, and this is expected to have an impact on the markets as well, since real estate is a key asset class here in Korea. And overseas, the U.S. will announce non-farm payrolls for July, and this will be an important indicator of how the world's largest economy is performing, as this figure has almost an immediate effect on the dollar and equities. The European Central Bank, meanwhile, is set to announce its latest economic bulletin, which forms the basis for the bank's policy decisions. This has been Jamie Kim for Business Daily.
The cryptocurrency Bitcoin split Tuesday morning in the U.S., creating an all-new clone currency called Bitcoin Cash. Following the split, Bitcoin's holders have seen their Bitcoins duplicated into Bitcoin Cash, with the new currency maintaining all of the original's transaction history and amounts. The clone currency came about due to divided opinions over the future of the original currency, with miners concentrating on transaction speeds while power brokers emphasized better security. The new Bitcoin Cash started off slowly due to uncertainty from from investors, required softer changes, and fears that the split could create a lack of credibility in the virtual currency market. Korea's household savings are projected to fall in the coming years, with seemingly no light at the end of the tunnel. A Bank of Korea report estimates that negative growth in household savings will begin in 2026, a side effect of the rapidly aging population. The household saving rate is expected to fall from what was 8.9% in 2015 to minus 3.6% in 2030. The percentage of senior citizens as a proportion of the total population is expected to double to 24.5% over that time period. Japan is undergoing a similar trend of rapid aging, with household savings rate falling to minus 0.5% 3 years ago, as senior citizens reached over a quarter of the country's total population. That does it all for now. We'll be back with more business news at the same time, same place here at Business Daily. As always, thank you for watching. Goodbye.